Welcome to episode 22 of Living in Infinity. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about what's going on in the legal realm of AI. There's a lawsuit we're going to talk about quite a bit involving the New York Times and OpenAI. And so we're going to look at that and then talk a little bit about X, its traffic, our experiences, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, so this New York Times lawsuit is pretty interesting. I think could kind of open up the floodgates like a potential content war as far as like who owns the rights to content when it comes to AI models training on just content that's on the internet. So just to kind of outline the lawsuit itself, New York Times is suing Microsoft and I guess OpenAI for alleging copyright infringement, saying that so OpenAI is filing a lawsuit that seeks to hold Microsoft and OpenAI accountable for billions of dollars in statutory and actual damages. Um, so they're basically stating that they are owed for unlawful copying and the use of New York Times uniquely valuable works. So basically, what they're claiming is that or it is true that OpenAI use New York Times content to train their models, but what basically New York Times is stating is that that's copyright infringement because their writers are the ones actually putting these articles together, and New York Times owns the rights to that content, and so they are stating that they want OpenAI to completely remove all New York Times data from their database, and then also retrain their models entirely without using any of the New York Times content. Um, Now, whether or not this lawsuit has any grounds, I don't really know. To me, it seems a bit out there because I don't. Let's talk about you for example. Like you're a writer. If you go read a bunch of New York Times articles and you know you learn all that content and then you go and write your own article that kind of uses all of that information, that's not against copyright. You're still like you're producing that your own writing, just using that content as a reference for, for your writing. And so that's basically what, GPT-4 is doing. It's not like it's literally copying and pasting things from these articles and saying that it's its own writing. Um, it's using it as a reference for learning, and then it writes it itself and references those articles as content. So I don't know if this is going to hold up in court, but I think the biggest thing here is going to be, let's just say New York Times does win this lawsuit. That's going to open up the floodgates for literally every other content producer to also sue not just OpenAI, but any other AI company that is using their content for training data. And this kind of begs the question, like, what does this environment look like going forward? Where, like, are these companies like OpenAI, are they just gonna have to dish out tons of money to all these content publications for access to their data? Or is the New York Times kind of gearing up to create their own models? So they're gonna basically, they're gonna if the lawsuit goes through, they're gonna say like, okay, we have the rights to all of our content, and no one else can have access to it, and then they're gonna create their own AI model based off all of that content, and that kind of gives them like a somewhat of a unique advantage, I guess, to compared to the rest of the AI companies. And so I don't know how this is gonna shake out, but to me, I think this could end up being a pretty messy legal environment going forward if they do win, because like I said, I mean, this is going to open up the floodgates for any company to sue OpenAI, not just OpenAI, but all the other AI companies as well. Um, so, I mean, what are your thoughts as far as like how this could potentially end up shaking out?
Um, so there's two things I want to address. I don't just based off my quick look at this issue, I don't think it's much of a case because I mean, you said it. It's ChatGPT doesn't go to New York Times material, directly pull from it, state it word for word in its responses, and then not give credit, um,
Yeah.
claiming it as its own work. What it does is it looks at all the information that's put into that's given to it, and then yeah, it uses that like we would um, to build its worldview per se, um, and then from there it spits out specific phrases and stuff. So that it's yeah, it's no different than me, reading for a year and then drafting up an article. Um, yeah. So no, I don't think it's much of a case. Um, if they do win, though, in my mind, that'll put a stop to these large models like OpenAI, Grok, all the other ones. I mean, I don't see how they could function if they don't have free access to all this information. Um, so then, like you mentioned, what that sets up New York Times to create their own. And then I'm assuming the move would be for all other content creators to do the same for their own content. So then you would have okay, it's so is that bad or good? Um, instead of a landscape where there's like four big players, four big models, you now have a landscape of a ton of little models. Um, okay, so the risk of like monopoly probably goes down. Um, the which is good. You get more competition, but then you get the smaller rate of informational exchange. Um, so again, I don't think it's much of a case, but if it does go through, I mean, at first it seems like a pretty obviously bad thing, and I still think that's true. But I mean, I do think there's somewhat of a discussion that needs to be had. Like, I don't think it would be. I think, yeah, like you said before we got on, I think it'd be nuanced in terms of its implications.
Well, another thing to add too, like, let's go the other route and say New York Times does win, but instead of saying, okay, no one can access our data, we're going to make our own models, they say to OpenAI or whoever, okay, if you want access to all of our content, you're going to pay us $1 billion a year. And that's the only way you have access to our real time information to use that for your training data. If that scenario plays out, the only that's going to be a big hit to these small AI companies that don't have $1 billion a year to fork out for content, you know? Um, and two, it's that this is going to be like a cascading effect, not just for New York Times, but any content producer, because they're all going to be like, okay, if OpenAI is paying New York Times $1 billion a year for their access to their content, what can we get for access to our content? And so everyone's just going to be charging these companies money for access to their data, which I'm not opposed to. Like, I think if you're actually producing content that you own the legal rights to and companies want to use that, then, you should be able to charge in that kind of environment. But the downside to that is there's very few companies that are going to have the money to access these massive amounts of data. Um, and I think that's where like X has a really good benefit because I mean, they're working on Grok. XAI is working on Grok. They have real time data through Twitter or through X, and that is a massive, massive advantage to any of these other companies that aren't going to have access to those. Um, and X has already blocked off scraping as best as they could. Like, no one has access to real time data on X now, other than XAI, and so all these other like OpenAI is completely blocked off from it. Meta is completely blocked off. Google, all of them are. Um, so people are really starting to like lock down their data as much as they can and gearing up for like this content war that I referenced earlier about like who owns what, who's going to pay for access to what. Um, so I'm really curious to see how this is going to play out, and two, like, so ChatGPT has the browsing feature. So if you say specifically like, here's this New York Times article, summarize it for me, and you paste in that link, it's going to go to that web page. It's going to look at all the content that's on there. It's going to analyze it and then provide a summary based on that. Is that illegal now? Like, is that a copyright infringement when it's literally just a browsing feature? It's not like it's, it's not like it's saying this is our own information that we came up with. It's just referencing it just as you asked it to do. So I've seen mixed opinions on whether or not this would go through. A lot of legal experts on X are saying that, oh, this is like a really strong case. And then other people are saying like, no, this is like just, it's going to be thrown out. So I don't know how it's gonna end up shaking out, but I do kind of feel like some platforms are going to have the ability, maybe not New York Times, but some platforms are gonna have the ability to actually license their content, like X, for example. I mean, that's a real-time data feed across the entire globe, hundreds of millions of users. That's worth a lot of money. Um, you can also beg the question, are the writers are basically doing the same thing that ChatGPT is doing. They're just looking at other information out there, congregating it in their own head, and then writing their own version of it. Does that
Mhm.
mean that they should have legal bounds over what they just did? I don't know if I believe that, but
I mean, that's the process all
yeah.
all writing,
Or
all
just any
content
kind
really
of
that's ever
really
been.
content production in general, like videos, like it comes from somewhere.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. So it doesn't make sense. So do you think that going back to what you said about X and like their advantage with their real time feed and access to uh, you know, the whole globe essentially. Like that seems to be just a wild advantage that they have compared to uh, ChatGPT. I mean,
Yeah.
in terms of like, yeah, obviously, so that the relevance relevancy of like the what Grok says, um, and then also just the relevancy to the user. Um, yeah, I guess I never really thought about that. I wonder if ChatGPT and OpenAI, like, I wonder if they thought about that. I mean, I'm sure they have, but I wonder what their plan to address that is because that seems
Yeah. The only
huge.
way right now you can really get real-time data through ChatGPT is through their browsing feature, which is drastically different than using it on Grok. So, I mean, if you use ChatGPT, the browsing feature, and you say like, give me the scores of the basketball games last night or whatever, that's like a 20-second process almost. The little thing comes up saying it's browsing Google. It tells you what pages it goes to. It tells you what it's looking at, and then it gives you the answer. Whereas if you do it with Grok, which I haven't paid for Grok, but I've seen plenty of video demos of this, it's almost instant. Like, I don't know what kind of searching mechanism they have on their back end for this, but it's pulling directly from tweets. Whereas ChatGPT, it's just a bot that is browsing Google. That those are two drastically different things. Um, so yeah, I think it's a massive advantage. And I mean, with Meta, for example, they have their Llama open source models. They've got access to Instagram feeds, threads, which I wouldn't even count, but also Facebook. Um, so that's a strong benefit. Um, Google has access to
But,
YouTube.
um, you know, again, the advantage still goes to X there because of the censorship baked within within Meta and YouTube.
Mhm.
The quality of the data it's going to get is not going to be as good. So, uh, yeah, again, X pulls ahead.
Yeah. That's a good point. And I think regardless of what your opinion is of X, I think anyone will tell you that it's one of, if not the best source for real-time information on just about any topic. Like I get all of my news from X because it comes out instantly. Whereas anywhere else, whether it's news on TV or New York Times articles, whatever, like it takes time for the data or the information to get processed, turned into a news segment or turned into a news article. Whereas on X, it's coming out within seconds of things happening. Like it's just like literally one small tweet away and it's blasted to hundreds of millions of people. Um, and not only that, like you're getting tons of different perspectives as well. Whereas New York Times, you're getting the one perspective of that writer. That's it. And that's influenced by whatever kind of culture they have at that company, whatever kind of, people behind the scenes pulling whatever strings they are to push certain agendas. Same goes for if you're watching Fox, CNN, whatever. That's one perspective. Whereas on X, you can get just about as many perspectives as you want over that topic. And so Grok having access to all of that, I mean, there's nothing that can really compare to that, in my opinion. And I think for as far as a model that you want to use on a consistent basis throughout the day for getting real time information, and not only that, but just like as much of an unbiased perspective as you can get. I mean, I don't. I think Grok is really the only one that's going to be able to offer that, and so that kind of makes you think like Elon purchasing Twitter. I don't. It was a free speech play, but at the end of the day, I think it's really an AI play. Like that's an incredibly powerful data source. And I think the whole free speech thing was kind of a way for Elon to frame it to where a lot of people could get behind the purchase. And like the free speech was like the mission for the purchase. But in reality, I think it was probably more of like an AI play as far as actually creating, like he has to make a return on that. He didn't just spend $46 billion of his own cash. Like he has other investors in this deal that he's going to have to pay back. And
Yeah.
I think the AI part of that is where he's going to create a massive amounts of capital in order to pay those people back.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if I necessarily see it as like that was his overall strategy. To me, it seems more of like a nice little coincidence. Uh,
Could be true.
but
Yeah.
either way, uh, it's a good thing. Uh, I think for sure. But yeah, I'm trying to sit here and think like, cause I use X for all my news too. And it's just great because there's something about like watching the discussion unfold that's just like so much better than going to an article. Cause it's like, yeah, you're reading people's opinions, but you're doing it in a manner to where you, at the end of the day, have to like put them all together, kind
Yeah.
of create your own image. I feel like, where if you just read an article, you really, I just feel like they do that for you more than when you go through your Twitter feed.
Yep.
Um, yeah. And two, it's so great because like a lot of times what'll happen on my feed is I'll get a lot of tweets that all have the same point, the same view, whatever. But then just all you got to do, click on the tweet, go to the comments, and there's always counterpoints.
Yeah.
Always. Um, and who the hell, like, you go to an article, you don't read the comments on the article. I mean, I think
If
there
there's
is.
even a way to leave comments.
Right. Right. So no, um, yeah, I know you said you wanted to ask me about my experience on X. I really like it. I haven't thought too much about it critically, but I use it every day. Um, I s- Sometimes it feels like, hmm, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if I have any complaints really to make. It's pretty good.
Yeah. What I think the
Yeah.
important distinction there as far as, um, at least for me, like when you read, I think this, a lot of people do this, when you read like a New York Times article or any kind of article, I think the general population looks at that as a source of like trusted information. And you aren't thinking about it from the perspective of like a person wrote this. You see it as the organization as a whole is responsible for putting that content out. Like,
It-
whereas on Twitter,
yeah, it's like
you know it
it
comes
has
from a
it
person. It's very more personalized because you see that person right there. Whereas New York Times, the who wrote it, it's very small. You don't pay any attention to it at all. Like you just like, oh, the New York Times, they did that or whoever, you know?
yeah. Yeah, I would say the average person, 10 years ago probably saw it as like a source of absolute truth.
Yeah.
And so then what you're saying is on X because which I think is dead right. Like even when a tweet comes from a source I'm familiar with and trust, there's still like I still have a sense of skepticism about it
Yeah.
or like I want to critically critique it. Um and probably part of that is because you can only tweet so much. I mean, I guess that's not really the case, but oftentimes a tweet is short and so you're kind of forced to like, okay, so what are the bigger issues surrounding this?
Mhm.
220 character tweet or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's interesting.
And I think too, I mean, you mentioned like 10 years ago, people would view these news publications as like a source of absolute truth. I think a lot of that still carries over today. I mean, especially, I guess, older generations, like older than us, they still religiously watch the news. Like every morning, news comes on. End of the day, the news is on to get a recap of the day and everything. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
an example of this would be 2 weeks ago, I think. Um, it was all over every news publication ever that Tesla was having a massive recall. Like every single one of their vehicles was getting recalled. And it was this crazy dramatic story about how dangerous they were, blah, blah, blah. I had multiple family members send me this saying like, "Oh, did you see every Tesla is getting recalled?" Which for the record, the whole news story was like basically completely bullshit. Like just, it wasn't a recall. It was just a software update that they had to change a couple of like the safety mechanisms. Um, so it was nothing like this is very standard, standard software update that makes the car safer. And it was completely framed in a way that was just not true whatsoever. But to go back to my original point, multiple people referenced this to me saying like, "Oh, this is crazy. Did you see this?" Like straight from the news. So I think a lot of the general population, I still think, looks to these news publications as like a source of truth, and they just kind of take things word for word um, on what they say. Whereas we're kind of getting a lot more accustomed to like using, X, for example, as our Twitter source. And while you may read something, the profile picture and the name of who it comes from is right there. And so there's like built in skepticism because you see like, oh, this is just from some dude online. Like I need to make sure that, or at least be like not read it word for word, take everything with a grain of salt and figure things out on my own. Uh, and that's why I think I mean, if you want to be objective about things, then X is like by far the best way to get your news source because you can just get so many different opinions. And like you said, just go read the comments. You're gonna get every kind of opinion imaginable. Like You're gonna have crazy people, you're gonna have, you know, people on the right, people on the left, moderates, like you've got everything. Um,
Yeah, because it's not like, the news is super segregated between left and right. Like liberals don't watch Fox and
yeah.
conservatives don't watch CNN, but liberals follow conservatives and conservatives follow and engage with liberals.
Yeah.
You see it all the time on X. And so it's a great, yeah, I think that's exactly why you can go there and get the full scope or close to a full scope of whatever the issue is.
Mhm. And I think people are starting to gravitate towards that. I mean, one statistic I wanted to reference was last month, X had over 1.5 billion unique visitors, which is crazy growth from where it was at. I mean, I don't remember the exact numbers off the top of my head. I think X right now is at around like 600 million daily active users, whereas when the purchase first happened, it was more around like 3 or 400 million. So traffic is going up consistently. It's still not anywhere close to the level of like Instagram. I think Instagram has like 2 billion daily active users or something crazy like that. Um, but it's at least getting there. Um, I mean, we saw like Threads has basically dropped off the face of the earth, which we kind of predicted. As nothing really came from that. Um, but it's just good to
I don't
see.
think you can, I'm not sure you can compare Instagram and Twitter. I'm not sure it's a completely fair comparison just based off the types of media they are. Uh,
Mhm.
the literacy rate in America is trash. Uh, and, uh, and the level at which those who can read is really low on average. So, yeah, yeah, I think people are going to be more drawn to images rather than text. So, I mean, I don't know if they'll ever get there, but,
Yeah, no, I agree, and I don't even think it. I wouldn't care if it never passes up Instagram or TikTok or like. I mean, Instagram and TikTok. I think TikTok is the number one spot. I don't know how many daily active users they have, but primarily because they have like it's in China, whereas I don't think China has access to Facebook or Instagram. So they get a massive boost of people through that, obviously. But
mm,
I don't I don't think X needs to surpass those in order to be a very successful platform. I think as they're on the right trajectory right now as far as growth. The biggest issue still seems to be advertisers pulling ad spend. Um, which I think what I've seen over the past week or two is a lot of companies are starting to advertise again um, on X. But so we'll see, if that trend continues or not. But I think it's good that X is trying to move away from being like live or die, but based on advertising spend. I mean, they have what's their subscription service called? Like X Plus or something, or Premium X Premium. Um, so they have that. They're building in that subscription service. They have Grok, which is still not accessible to that many people. It's still kind of in beta, but I mean, if Grok ends up being something that's on a similar level to ChatGPT, that's a massive amount of revenue that can come from that. Uh, and if X really wanted to, which I don't know if I see this happening, they could license their data to OpenAI or Meta or any of these other companies and just charge them, an annual subscription for access to the data. Um, I think that X is going to be more than fine in the long run. And I think it's really just a matter of, can they completely pull away from relying solely on advertisers to keep the bills paid? Um, or are they just going to eventually convince a lot of these advertisers to come back and increase their ad spend? Um,
yeah. Um, do you know much about the situation between X and the EU?
um, no, I remember seeing the EU opened up some sort of like investigation into X, but I didn't quite look into the full details.
Yeah, and they just threatened Musk with sanctions if he doesn't comply to their request for censorship.
Mm.
Yeah, and that's all I know of it. I'm trying to think of like the implications of that. I mean, based off his interview, uh, where he told Disney to f off, like, obviously I don't expect him to cave to those demands. So I only foresee that tension between X and the E to grow. Okay, so what they like inhibit the Europeans' access to X. Well, tensions are already super high in Europe. Um,
Mhm.
so in my mind, it just seems like this losing situation. Like, you know, they're definitely by doing that going to go against the will of the Europeans, as far as I can tell. Um, yeah, I just, we've talked about it before. It seems like things are turning around. Um, I think that's just another indication.
Well, I will say Europe trying to swing their weight when it comes to internet access is a scary thing because they are the reason that every single website that we visit has that little cookie warning thing that pops up. That's like the worst thing that's ever been put on the internet, I think. Like, you know what I'm talking about? I mean, it's on every single
Oh
website. When
yeah,
it comes up like accept or reject cookies, that's because of the EU. It is so annoying and it makes zero sense. Like it's the 21st century and we have to click whether or not we accept or reject cookies on every single web page. I mean, it's horrific. And so I don't know what the EU is really thinking in terms of like how they're trying to get their grips over control of the internet, but I
mhm,
hope they don't have any sort of influence over X. I mean, they certainly wouldn't in the US or the rest of the world, but as far as in EU, they might, X might be a little different there.
yeah, yeah. I guess looking like ahead, um, I mean, the governments they're trying to control the internet and fit it to within the existing system, but um, they can't. So I think they either have to. I see like two ways forward. They either have to let the internet go, do what it's going to do, which is inevitably going to lead to them being held more accountable, having more honest, open discussion, because everything they do behind closed doors nowadays seems to get leaked, and all the screw ups get exposed to their fullest extent. I mean, not to the fullest extent, but they the public learns a lot more about them than they would otherwise. So it's either, I think the internet's going to push the government to become better, or there's just going to be this growing tension between the two, and God knows what's going to come of that. Um,
Mhm.
but I don't know. I mean, the only thing certain about the future is that it's going to be different. So uh, I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah. Or the EU could just can kind of continue, or I guess it's safe to say that the EU has been on somewhat of a decline for the past decade or so. And I think a lot of these internet restrictions they're trying to impose could just accelerate that even further. Um, Whereas like the US is going to have, we have unrestricted access to the internet where, I mean, granted, they're trying to impose a lot of censorship and stuff, but maybe not to the degree that the EU is trying to do, where they want to just completely block certain platforms from being accessed, whether if they don't have control over those platforms. Um, I mean, that's like China level of restriction. I mean, like I said earlier, you can't access Facebook, uh, you can't access YouTube in China. They have TikTok, but it's their own version of it. It's very different from US TikTok. Um,
Mm.
and seeing the EU kind
That's
of
just
go down that
crazy.
path is a little scary.
Yeah, it's just crazy because really, what the internet is just a place where people go to talk. So it'd be like it's a virtual place where people go to talk. So all this were happening outside the context of the internet age, like this is the equivalent of the government coming to a gym and being like,
Yeah.
you can't talk about this. So
Yeah.
going to a church, can't talk about this.
Mhm.
It's when put into that context, this is the most, this trend we're seeing is just the most like egregious breach of the Constitution you could ever imagine.
Yeah.
And it has no grounds, in my opinion, whatsoever.
Mhm. Yeah. A lot of this, I mean, kind of tying this back into AI, a lot of the censorship stuff is like I think it can drastically influence, how AI ends up shaping out. I mean, like you kind of said earlier, like let's say that the New York Times does want to train their own AI model, which I don't necessarily think they're going to do, but let's just say that they do. All of the the data on New York Times, or let's do a better example, something a little more drastic, like CNN. Let's say CNN wants to make their own AI model for like a real time news feed. That is like going to be just absurdly biased. I mean, same if Fox did, or really any of these far right, far left, leaning publications. I mean that's scary to think about too. I think there's obviously gonna be a lot of different AI models that exist, and I don't know what that environment looks like in terms of like how do you as a consumer choose which AI models you want to use. Um, just the whole data controlling aspect of AI is what I think a lot of I'm very curious to see how that's gonna end up shaking out because there's potential for a lot of like ideas that a lot of people may not agree with to get, you know, pushed into these models and heavily influence the way that they are projecting information to people. And so I'm not sure what that's gonna really look like. I mean, you look at yeah, I don't know. I mean,
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's why. Okay, so let's go like maybe you have scenario one where each publication makes their own model. Um, so there it becomes incumbent upon the user to go to different models or in the process of researching the same topic. Where an inherent benefit of like in scenario two, where ChatGPT has access to all this stuff, you know, that becomes a more user friendly experience and while becoming, equally as responsible because it can pull information from both sides of the aisle. I don't think X is affected by either of those situations because it's going to get to be able to pull from both sides of the aisle regardless
mhm,
because of its, what goes on its platform. But outside of X, yeah, I mean, I guess scenario two where, ChatGPT or OpenAI has access to everything that I guess that's still the better option. Uh, I want to mention, I mean, it's not relevant. I don't think it's fully relevant. So I'll wait, but I'll tell you about it later. It's interesting.
okay.
So yeah, I don't know. I guess the main thing I've learned is that X is, yeah, I have high expectations for Grok. I guess is what I've learned.
Yeah. And I think if you buy like the highest subscription plan on X, you get instant access to Grok. So I might do that for like a month and just kind of play around with it and see, how it compares to ChatGPT. But yeah, this whole like thinking into the future where we have tons of different AI models to choose from. I don't know what that looks like because I don't think that's a great user experience. People don't want to think about how like your average everyday person that doesn't have a very good understanding of like what's even happening in the AI world. I don't think they want to have to think about what model they're using or which ones they prefer when there's potentially hundreds or thousands to choose from, you know? How do you differentiate between those? You can't really without using them all extensively. And so,
Yeah, it's not really a easily navigable
yeah,
situation.
not at all. And
Mm.
so I don't know if I see that scenario playing out where there's a ton of different AI models that are widely used. I think I don't know. I don't know what it looks like, but I would almost think that we don't even think about we will or in the future we won't even think about what model we're using. It's more of just like, yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to think of
You're
what
more
that might
just
look like.
focused. Yeah. Well, I think okay. So let's look at social media. So social media, there's not 1,000 platforms to choose from. It's pretty manageable for the everyday person to figure out what platform they like best, and then they go to that. Uh, so I think ideally that's what the AI situation looks like. So, I think the best situation going forward is that ChatGPT further develops and Grok further develops and whatever Llama, uh, yeah,
Mhm.
so on and so forth. Um, yeah. So, which is the picture we agreed on since the beginning, I think, of the AI boom is, yeah, you want a healthy amount of competition. You don't want one. You don't want to rely on one. And now we've discovered you don't want 100 without. Uh,
Yeah. Well, one scenario I will say that I do, which I wouldn't consider these like models for anyone to access, but I do think like hyper personalized AI is going to be a thing. So let's say Apple, for example, comes out with a model, or at least an underlying model that they put on every single iPhone. And that model has access to all the data on your phone, or across your entire Apple account. So it could be your computer, it could be your phone, everything. Your health data within your watch. It's extremely personalized to you specifically. It knows what you do every single day. It knows who you're texting. It knows your calendar. It knows what you do for work. It knows everything about you. Like that, I would consider to be like a somewhat of an individual model that is made specifically for you. And so I see that playing out for sure. Because I mean, at the end of the day, you can't just make an AI model that's like going to be as universally useful to every single person in an equal way. That's just it needs to be super personalized to you specifically, but it also needs to do it in a way that's like very uh, objective, I guess. I mean, if you're someone with very like profound political views, for example, you don't really want the AI to just be like an echo chamber for what you're thinking. I mean, ideally, you don't want that, right? Some people might want that, but generally speaking, you don't want the AI to just like adhere to whatever beliefs you're doing. Like you want it to be as objective as possible, but at the same time, you want it to know everything about you and like kind of work for you in a way as an assistant. And so I think it's going to be a hard balance to do. Um, that's something to.
well, yeah, that's going to be tough because you're going to have to know what's best for you. I mean, it's almost like picking like a person to date, to marry, you know, you
Mhm.
got to know what's best for you, um, in order to have it fulfill that role properly. And, that's a hard thing to know what's best for you. So that's an interesting problem right there.
Yeah. So I
It's
don't.
also well, and also just from like a privacy standpoint, which there's a great podcast with Jordan Peterson. He talks about this about I think it's specifically about the use of like individual models like this while simultaneously not having not giving people access to every inch of your being.
Mhm.
So that's another problem that comes up with this.
Do you view that as a problem? Like, let's say you had a an AI robot assistant, like a physical robot in your home or something. Because I that's a likely scenario that could play out, 20, 30 years from now. Would you not want it to have access to everything in order to like be, because in my opinion, the more it knows, the better it can like serve you as like an assistant. But where would you want to draw the line if there is a line?
Um, well, I, I don't know if I mean, the idea of it knowing everything about me is uncomfortable. Um, Although I don't know if I'm ultimately against that, but the, uh, the security measures that would have to be in place, uh, would have to be intense.
Yeah.
Um, Cause we don't live in Harry Potter. There's no truth serum. There's
Hmm.
stuff in me that not just is safe no matter what happens. And, nobody's going to get it. That's not true if it goes into that robot. So, uh, yeah, I would have to, yeah, there'd have to be some specific, very effective security measures in place. But two, I don't know, like we've drifted kind of mindlessly into this age of the internet where a lot of our shit's on the internet and probably not protected that well. So maybe it occurs like that, which is scary. But yeah,
Yeah. Because you want the robot to like have access to the internet, obviously, so it can pull information for you. But your personal data, you don't want that just like stored on the cloud because then any hacker could eventually get to it. So
right.
yeah, there needs it would. Well, I agree. There would need to be like some very strong security measures for something like that. But I mean, I think we've kind of become used to all of our data being accessible to our devices. I mean, we still have. I mean, if you have Instagram on your phone, it it listens to basically everything you're saying. Um, I don't know if this is true for Instagram, but TikTok, it's a fact that it tracks everything across all of your apps, your keystrokes across every app, your texts, um,
What app
everything.
does that?
TikTok.
Wow, crazy.
Yeah.
So one uh, direct concern I have about that. So I recently read a book. It's titled "Live Not My Lies," and it just kind of breaks down some aspects that allowed uh, Christians and anti-communists alike to survive under communist rule. And one of the things it stressed was the importance of um, keeping your home like a sanctuary, a place where you can truly go be you. And it just really talked about again the importance of like your home being yeah, just secluded from the outside world. So uh, because doing so allows you to withstand whatever the hell is going on around you. So it's just something to keep in mind as we go forward with this problem.
Yeah. It did. It could become a very scary environment because, like, let's just say, you do have this robot assistant that basically lives in your home with you and interacts with you throughout the day and sees a lot of the things that you do in your home. Um, and there's certain companies that I would not want having access to that. I think a good example that a lot of people would understand right now is like Amazon. A lot of people have Alexa devices throughout their house. Um, these things are not like Amazon isn't selling these things for $20 because they're nice and they're good company. Like they want them to be cheap so you buy them and they can listen to things and give you ads for things that you talk about or learn things about you. I mean, like we're already
Yeah.
kind of used to this environment in a way, but now think about a robot that like has built-in cameras that sees everything. I mean, that's just we're taking things up a big notch there.
Yeah. So the question is like, what's the what's the benefit? Like, how much is this robot gonna improve your life? Uh, I don't know. I guess that's to be seen. Um, yeah. So okay, let's try and walk through this. So like, I'm not even convinced. I've started to think of the world in terms of corporations. So like before there were kingdoms and you lived under those and you weren't really free. And then we kind of moved on to governments and maybe we're like in democracy. Maybe we were a little free then, but I'm not even sure we like our main kind of, I'm going to call them oppressors for the rulers. Like to me, I don't see the world really anymore in terms of country lines. It's more of like you have these corporations that I think make up the major entities of the world. Uh, this is kind of the, yeah. I mean, I'm sure I'm definitely not the first person to think of this, but this is a theory that I'm just kind of I've been thinking on lately. Like, and so, it was like a goal of the Soviet Union to get into people's houses and control their lives to every latest detail and learn all these details about people. And now, that's the same goal that like Amazon has and all these advertisers and stuff. And yeah, we just like willingly let them do it now. Whereas before, people were super weirded out by that.
Mhm.
It's just really weird we've like, we think we're this free people and politically that's becoming not true. And then, like, I'm not even sure it was really ever true in the last 30 years uh, or something like that.
Mhm.
I don't know. It's that's a little incoherent,
Yes.
but it's just
No,
interesting.
I get what you're saying. I mean, it's just something that we don't even think about now. Um, like we make jokes about like, oh, I said something the other day and then I got ads for it on Instagram. Like, oh, so funny, but like that's crazy. um,
Yeah.
and to think that it's inevitable in my opinion. Like we will be at a point where like we are just going to have these robot assistants that live with us and do things for us, and there's a lot of risk that comes with that as far as like, okay, who's building these, like what corporations control these robots? How do they influence them? How much data do they have access to? Um, so there's a lot of implications that come with that, but
Yeah. And the thing is I don't think it's like an avoidable problem because the people who utilize these robots and incorporate them into their lives are going to become, you know, uh, exponentially more efficient theoretically. So then they're going to gain the upper hand. So it's not like you can sacrifice the robot, I don't think, in the name of like whatever, protecting your own
data
experience
privacy.
and yourself. Yeah. So again, it's like it's kind of like the money, the position I have on money. It's like, okay, yeah, there's virtue in not being rich, but the evil guy's gonna get rich, and then you're screwed.
Mhm.
So it's like the and it's just the same situation here. So it's a problem that needs to be solved as far as I can tell.
Yeah, I guess there's just certain trade-offs that we have to make. I mean, I think, yeah, if you ask just about anyone, like, okay, you get all of your data privacy back, but you no longer get access to your smartphone. Who's going to take that trade? No one. I mean, the same is probably
Yeah,
going to be the case with these robots. Like, okay, here's a hypothetical question. Let's say, because Tesla's working on their robot. Um, so they're a good example of this. Like, these are going to be put in homes at some point. Uh, How much would you pay for one of these robot assistants that, like, I don't want to say it's AGI, but like it will do majority of things for you. It'll cook, it'll clean, it will do things outside for you that you don't want to do. It will, if you need like a workout assistant, it'll do that for you. can answer just about any questions for you. It can be just so your 24/7 assistant for everything that you need in life. I mean, how much money would you pay for something like that?
Uh, don't know. Uh,
Would you pay
it,
if they cost 15 grand, would you buy one?
hmm. For, in my current state, no. But yeah, I could see why you would. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I think this conversation, it, this is a point made in the Bible. Like you can't not participate in the world.
Sure.
Um, and I think that's going to be a reaction that a lot of people have is like they're going to want to resist this, but you can't. It's like you said with the phone. Like if you took that deal, if a large percentage of the population took that deal and gave up their smartphone to have their internet, their privacy back, it's a death sentence. They're going to get uh, outperformed and eventually conquered.
Yeah.
Uh, you see that all throughout history. It's the people on on the forefront of technological innovation that, uh, for better or worse, win, um, or who will end up being the winners. So yeah, you can't not participate. Um, and and another point you made is that it's a trade off. So like as even though we're progressing, uh, I don't know if it's like the world's going to get any more net positive, or at least this progress isn't going to come without tremendous downside. I don't think
Mhm.
it's, it's just life. That's the world. So I don't think this, which is the point we made before. I don't think this AI wave is like especially bad. I'm not in the doom and gloom camp now, but yeah, it's, you know, I think it's like Brett Weinstein. He said, a proper worldview is one that sees things as trade offs. Everything is a trade.
Yeah.
So, so yeah.
Yeah. I think it'll for sure be a net positive, but like you said, it's going to come with a lot of costs, and I don't think we quite know what those costs are going to be just yet, or like how drastic they're going to be. Um, because like I said, there's lots of implications that come from a robot that knows every single thing about you and has video footage of majority of your day and everything you do. Um, that opens up you to a lot of risk, and there's a lot of, I guess, influence uh, that could be used through this. Like, I mean, if you use this robot for basically everything and you're kind of using it as like a source of truth in a way, or for a lot of things that you don't want to have to look up manually, that there's a lot of risk with that because it could just lead you down certain paths that it wants to lead you down, or
Yeah.
whatever corporation controls that, they'd have crazy amount of influence over the entire world to a degree that we've never seen before. So
Yeah. But uh, on the flip side, to properly uh, combat that, a person would have to become perhaps, they would have to improve to an equal amount. Uh, oh God, it. They would have to become as equally, whatever, smart, independent. Okay.
it's like critical thinking, you think?
Robot. Yes. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. So, with that risk comes a great upside, I think.
Mhm. Yeah. The critical thinking skills are it's going to be by far the most important thing, I think, in this AI revolution. We've talked about this before on previous episodes, but uh, yeah, when you have all these different AI models that are work our activity with these is only going to increase more and more as they get better and as they become more integrated into our lives. Like, yeah, critical thinking skills is going to be if we lose that ability, it could potentially be like a very drastic it could lead to a very drastic decline of society. I mean, whatever corporations are kind of pulling the strings with these models, they could influence them heavily and sway a lot of people in whichever direction they want to. Um,
Yeah. Well, and that's a trend we've seen with, like, I would say, the internet, whether it be YouTube or X or Facebook or Instagram. I'd say there's two camps. There's the people that have blindly been led to, manipulated and led to think certain things. And so then, there's been a significant decrease in their critical thinking, but also there's been a significant rise in the other camps' critical
yeah.
thinking. And so I think that's just what that is just going to keep on going um, into the future.
Would you say people's critical thinking skills are better overall or worse overall than they were, say, 10 years ago before social media was like as prominent as it is now?
Yeah. I think in the people around me, um, it's gotten better, but um, I've also, but I think that's equally true for the other side as well. It's probably gotten worse for others as well. Um, yeah, but certainly with my friends and family, it's gotten better.
Yeah. I think I would agree with that. And I think like Elon's purchase of X is kind of part of that mission is like allowing people the ability to think critically. Uh, and so I think there's somewhat of a movement that's kind of starting as far as I don't want to say free speech, but just as far as like, thinking for yourself as much as possible and not trusting things that you read online at first glance. Like have always reading things with a grain of salt. I think that's becoming more common now. Um, with or there's at least a movement that's kind of being pushed
Mm,
with Elon's purchase of X. But yeah, I would also agree on the flip side, the number of people that just kind of blindly read things, they read headlines and not think twice about it, that number is also skyrocketed. So,
yeah. You know what I think is a telling thing that really shows like a positive trend in our culture is the fact that uh, Rogan gets. I mean, how many views a month does he get?
absurd. I mean, the most popular
Yeah, an
podcast.
unbelievable amount.
So, yeah.
And it's, as far as I know, it's just growing, growing, growing. And then you look at mainstream media, and it's just crashing and tanking. And um, yeah, I don't know culture. I've learned recently, it's like turning a cruise ship. Um, it takes a minute.
Mhm.
I think that's a good analogy. Um, and so, like, I think we've seen small benefits from that occurrence already, but I think the the damage to the traditional ways, to traditional institutions, it's already been done. I just don't think we're seeing the full extent of it yet. So, like, my view of the next 20 years from now, I think it's going to be fantastic because I think Rogan, I started listening to him in like 16. That's when podcasts seemed to blow up. And that's when people for the first time in a long time got real access to amazing conversations and
Mhm.
information. And since then, billions and billions of those conversations have been listened to. So yeah, I just think it's going to take a minute, but 20 years from now, I think we're going to see a significant increase in uh, critical thinking, and then tremendous benefit from that.
Yeah, I agree. I think we're on the right trajectory. There'll be lots of ups and downs along the way of getting to that point. Uh, Lots of probably drama and chaos, but yeah, I would agree that we're on the right path. And over a long period of time, 20, 30 years or so, um, things will be looking
Maybe even longer. Like,
yeah,
I just read a book. It traces where we're at culturally all the way back to 1776, and how our world kind of like got set in motion from
yeah,
that year. And we're still feeling effects from that year.
yeah.
So, yeah, it's a waiting game, I think, but, hopefully it's not 276 years from now that things start to get good. But I still think even up to then, we're still gonna see positive effects from, like, I mean, truly, like, the podcast, it's gotta be up there with the I mean, it's kinda separate from everything else we've been talking about, but podcasting has to be, like, one of the greatest things that ever happened to humanity.
It's just, I
I
mean,
I think so. I think that's
yeah,
true. Because
it,
traditionally, these types of conversations would only occur within, like, small groups of people, and they wouldn't get anywhere. They might be in a book, but how far does that book get spread throughout
yeah.
humanity? But these podcasts are so rich, and they go everywhere.
No, you're totally right. I haven't really thought about it that way, but it really just opens up like the span of information that people have access to, a different amount of opinions that people have access to, and it just makes it so easily accessible. I mean, like you had a book. I mean, not very many. That book may not spread to very many people because just the barrier of doing so. I mean, purchasing the book, reading it, blah blah blah.
Printing it.
Whereas, yeah, there's so much that goes into it, but a podcast, you just click record and upload, and boom, anyone can access it. Anyone with internet access
Mhm.
can access it. So yeah, you're right. I mean, it's definitely going to have, I mean, massive amount of influence on, uh, I think people's critical thinking skills because it's just giving people the ability to be independent in how they get their information and how they process it, think about it.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think that's probably a good spot to wrap it here. Bit of a different one today now that we back into the more topical um, topics. But yeah, is there anything else you kind of want to add in?
Mm-mm.
Alrighty. Well, we will be back next week then, and thanks everybody for watching.